All right, hello, Mr. H here. And this video is going to be about some rules for when we're explaining a behavior. So some guidelines to follow to help us explain behavior. This is for Purdue Special Education course, EDPS 51500, week 4. So when explaining behavior, there are 4 key rules. So number 1 is a behavior explanation must be inclusive. So what this means is it needs to detail the overwhelming majority of the behavior. So it needs to explain the behavior in all of its facets. And this is going to help us with some of the later rules, but this mostly is going to help us to be able to predict the behavior and ultimately start to change and shape that behavior. So the more we know about it, the more we understand it, and the better we can start to intervene with it. The second rule is it needs to be verifiable. So what does this mean? This means we need to be able to test it. We need to be able to observe it. We need to be able to manipulate conditions so that we can test it, collect that data, and then use that data to make informed decisions. Third, it needs to have predictive utility. So that's really just a fancy way of saying is we need to be able to predict the behavior. We need to be able to know what circumstances, conditions, triggers, stimuli, environmental conditions, anything that accounts for that behavior, right? So that will allow us to predict when we will see that behavior. Once we know that, we can start changing variables. We can start changing conditions, and changing those conditions is what's going to allow us to shape that behavior over time. And the fourth and final rule is it must be parsimonious, right? So it must have parsimony. This one's a little confusing. So basically this means it needs to be the simplest it can be. So I know it already said it needed to be inclusive, which means it must account for the bulk of it, but the behavioral definition itself needs to be as simple as possible, while still accounting for the behavior. Now, here's the thing. A parsimonious definition may not necessarily be correct, but it's simple. And by being simple, it prevents us from just being wildly imaginative. It prevents us from making assumptions, which with behavior analysis, assumptions are dangerous. Assumptions is what leads us to making test subjects of students, and that is unethical, because they're children, right? So a parsimonious definition is simple, it's unimaginative, it still accounts for the occurrences, it accounts for the behaviors. It may not necessarily be correct, but it'll have a measure of correctness. So once again, those 4 rules are inclusivity, verifiability, predictive utility, and parsimony. And like I said, by following this, it gives us sort of those rules to follow. It creates a method by which we can start to piece together all the pieces we need to shape and change that behavior in a safe, testable, ethical, reproducible way. So thank you for listening.